Okay, grab your focus because today we are embarking on a really fascinating historical detective story. We're going to unravel a 2,000-year-old legend that literally sits at the very foundation of Korean history. It's a story that involves a faraway princess, a miraculous sea voyage, ancient political propaganda, and some incredibly cutting-edge modern DNA science. Throughout this explainer, we're going to separate the beautiful myth from the cold, hard facts and uncover the real hidden motives behind what might be one of history's most successful fabrications. So, let's get right into it. So, here is our big central question. Did an Indian princess really cross the sea 2,000 years ago to become a Korean queen? For centuries, the answer to this question wasn't just some casual academic debate. It was considered an absolute fact. It was a cornerstone of identity, a beloved national romance. The story of this 16-year-old princess is so enduring, it's so beautiful, and it's literally shaped the bloodlines of an entire nation. Chapter 1: The Legendary Indian Princess. To really understand why this legend matters so much today, we have to grasp the sheer scale of her legacy. 6 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. Today, roughly 6 million modern Koreans trace their direct lineage back to this single legendary marriage. We're talking about the Kim Kim clan, the Kim Ho clan, and the Incheon clan. When you do the math on that, that is nearly 1 in every 8 or 9 people in South Korea today. So this isn't some fringe myth kept alive by a few hardcore history enthusiasts, right? It's a massive, living, breathing family tree. So what exactly is the legend? Well, according to ancient texts, the princess hailed from a distant kingdom called Ayuta. The story goes that her parents had a dream where the heavenly lord commanded them to send their daughter to King Suro. Now, the king had actually refused all other brides because he just knew his destiny was arriving by sea. So she sets sail and arrives in the year 48 AD on this stunning ship with red sails, bringing a magical stone pagoda to calm the ocean waves. The myth claims she lived for an astonishing 157 years and bore 12 children. And here's a really crucial genealogical detail to keep in mind. The king allowed 2 of their sons to take her maiden surname, Heo, just so her family line wouldn't die out in this brand new land. Section 2. Testing science against history. Okay, let's pivot sharply from myth to hard science and see how this clash between romance and reality actually plays out. On one side of the historical ledger, we have the beautiful, magical claims from a 13th century text called the Samguk Yusa. Now, that text is actually the sole source of this legend. But on the other side, we have rigid historical reality. Historians have pointed out for a long time that a sea journey from India all the way to Korea in 48 AD would have been nearly impossible. Plus, living to 157 years old? Yeah, that completely defies human biology. But the most glaring discrepancy of all is that this princess is entirely absent from Korea's oldest and most historically rigorous text, the Samguk Sagi. The ultimate test, though, came pretty recently, in the summer of 2022. A team of geneticists from the University of Vienna and South Korea's UNIST Institute managed a brutally difficult scientific feat. You see, Korea's highly acidic soil usually destroys ancient DNA super quickly, but scientists managed to harvest the one tiny part of the skeleton that protects it best, the super dense petrous bone right in the inner ear. From that, they actually sequenced the genomes of the ancient Gaya elite from the 4th and 5th centuries, specifically to trace their maternal lineage. Now think about this. If Queen Heo truly came from India and was the mother of this lineage, her Indian maternal signature absolutely should echo in these ancient bones. But the data reveals a completely different story. The DNA of the Gaya elite was overwhelmingly from Bronze Age northern China, with a minor element of ancient Geumgwan ancestry from the Japanese archipelago. The amount of South Asian or Indian DNA? 0. Absolutely 0%. The lineage that passionately claimed an Indian mother carried literally no trace of India in their genes. Now wait a minute, you might be thinking. Didn't a 2004 study claim to find Indian DNA? Well, yes, that study found haplogroup M and kind of prematurely announced an Indian origin. But actually, haplogroup M is massive. It has branches all over East Asia, including those ancient Jomon people we just mentioned. That 2004 study simply misread a really common East Asian genetic marker. And what about the famous twin fish symbol carved on her tomb? People have cited that as ironclad proof of her Indian origins for years. Well, as it turns out, in 2018, the very anthropologists who championed that twin fish theory conceded that the symbol actually originated in ancient Babylonia and just spread independently all across Asia. Which brings us to a massive, million-dollar historical question. If the DNA definitively proves it false,
If the geography makes it physically impossible, and if the ancient artifacts don't line up, why? Why was this grand, incredibly detailed legend created in the first place? I mean, who exactly benefits from inventing a fabricated Indian princess?
Section 3. The true purpose behind the legend. To find out who benefits, we have to dig into the historical and political motives of the era. Let's trace the timeline, because it totally exposes the fabrication. In 48 AD, she supposedly arrives, right? But watch what happens next. In 562 AD, the Gaya kingdom is conquered by the rival Silla kingdom. Fast forward a few centuries to 1145, and the scholar Kim Busikya writes the Samguk Sagi. This is Korea's oldest, most reliable history, and he is completely silent about her. It isn't until the year 1281, which is more than 1,200 years after her supposed arrival, that a monk named Irion writes the Samguk Yusa, and boom, suddenly the legend just appears out of nowhere. So why did the monk Irion write this into existence? Well, it's actually pretty simple. He wanted to glorify Buddhism. By claiming an Indian princess arrived way back in 48 AD carrying a sacred stone pagoda, Irion effectively backdated the arrival of Buddhism in Korea by 300 whole years. It was a genius move. It connected the local Korean royalty directly to the sacred homeland of the Buddha himself. It was basically a brilliant piece of religious framing. But honestly, there was a second, much more desperate motive at play here. Remember how the Gaya kingdom was swallowed whole by Silla in 562 AD? Well, those Gaya elites suddenly woke up as a defeated, conquered aristocracy living inside someone else's kingdom. To survive, to maintain their high status, and frankly to demand any level of respect from their new conquerors, they desperately needed a glamorous divine origin story. I think this idea is captured so perfectly by this quote, "The legend was not decoration, it was the instrument by which a defeated family climbed back to the top." And you know what? It worked perfectly. Using this highly sacred, exotic pedigree, the descendants of King Suro and Queen Heo successfully integrated into the highest ranks of Silla society. In fact, one of those descendants was the famous general Kim Yusin, who eventually rose up and unified the warring three kingdoms into one Korea. So this completely made-up myth literally changed the course of a nation. Chapter 4. The role of myth in the modern world. Let's bring things back to the modern era, because it's wild how this ancient piece of political propaganda violently shapes the real world even today. Take her supposed Indian name, Princess Siriratna. Today, if you visit India, Queen Heo is widely honored under that name. It's printed right there on monuments and used in official government statements. But here's the crazy part. The name Siriratna does not exist in a single ancient Korean text. Actually, it was completely invented in the year 2015 by an Indian author for a children's comic book. Think about that. The supposedly authentic, ancient Indian name of this revered Korean queen is actually younger than the smartphone sitting in your pocket. Yet, despite being a total historical fabrication, the real-world, tangible diplomatic legacy it has built is staggering. Back in 2000, Ayodhya in India and Gimhae in South Korea actually became sister cities based on this story. In 2001, a huge memorial was inaugurated, and in 2018, South Korean First Lady Kim Jong-suk even visited India to lay the foundation for a massive multi-million-dollar memorial park expansion. Every single year, hundreds of South Koreans travel all the way to India to pay homage to a grandmother who, scientifically and historically speaking, likely never existed. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to take away from this explainer. The DNA, unequivocally, tells us she wasn't from India. The historical timeline clearly tells us she was a political and religious invention born out of desperation. And yet two modern nations have successfully built a bridge of friendship, diplomacy, and shared culture directly on the back of this story. So I have to ask you, even if it isn't historical fact, what is the value of a shared myth that brings the modern world closer together? It certainly makes you wonder what other historical legends we just blindly accept as fact, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked this incredible story. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.